So it seems like we have a lot of people joining us today. From the participant list, looks like around 75 folks. So welcome. If some of you have not had a chance to look at Samar's background, which Ali kindly sent in the WhatsApp message and also on the LinkedIn group for Park Launch, Samar has a very distinguished career. He did his undergrad at GIK and then got recruited by Microsoft, which kind of brought him over to like North America and the US and spent a few years at Microsoft, then went to Amazon, then came back to Microsoft in a pretty major senior role, and then joined Uber before starting his new company Temporal. As I was doing his research, like one of the two interesting things kind of popped up during this journey, which we will kind of dive into, as well as that like Summer's focus has been on this kind of idea which Temporal is built around since the start of his career. Like for the last 20 years, like while he's working at these companies, he's kind of like kept diving into this problem from different angles. So when he started Temporal, in a way, he already had product market fit. He already understood this space better than like most people could ever imagine. And that has been one of the biggest reasons for his success as well. So Summer, welcome to the webinar and very excited to have you and dive into the chat and kind of ask you a few questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Hassan, for the intro, and then glad to be here and excited.
So somewhere like the first thing I wanna start with is you did your undergrad at GIK, and as we were kind of chatting, as you were preparing for this conversation, you mentioned that after GIK, you actually worked at a local bank for a bit, and it was you applied to a few different jobs and ended up at a bank. So you didn't really had your typical start to a tech career. Maybe you want to share a bit more about that, and then how you ended up at Microsoft.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Karachi. So like after graduating from GIK, actually I got back to Karachi. I actually couldn't find a job in Karachi and at that time. So my first actually job was at ABN AMRO Bank, where they were actually it was like like pretty aligned with where I was hoping for to start my career because ABN AMRO was kind of opening up a developer center, I think by the name of like Global IT Systems essentially. There's actually a lot of folks from ABN AMRO Bank here at Microsoft from that time also. And so that's what brought me to Lahore, and where ABN AMRO was setting up a software development house in based in Lahore to kind of modernize their stack, and I kind of became part of that.
And and somewhere like you mentioned, like you were kind of part of the first cohort which Microsoft recruited from Pakistan. Like, was this like you kind of found this opportunity by yourself? Like they found you? How did you ended up kind of like even figuring out this is happening?
Yeah, so back then, so this is around like 99, where like 1999, where Microsoft was like growing like crazy back then. So to a point where there was like a big shortage of tech talent. Even today, it's so hard to find tech talent here in United States. So Microsoft back then started a program where they would fly out, like a specific team will fly out to different parts of the world and to tap into the talent or younger talent, raw talent in those places. And so, as part of that effort, they came. I was actually part of the first cohort of 10 developers that Microsoft directly hired from Pakistan. So actually, they came. They didn't came to Pakistan. They came to Dubai. They actually flew out like hundreds of developers from Pakistan to Dubai for interviews, and then I got selected as part of that. And that's how I got here in Redmond to start my journey at Microsoft.
Amazing. So you then worked on Microsoft, you went to AWS for a bit as well, then came back to Microsoft, then Uber, and now you're like running your own company. So you've worked at like two of the big Mac 7s. Uber is kind of like one of the biggest IPOs, one of the best tech companies of the last kind of decade as well. So, very distinguished organizations. What are maybe some key lessons if you had to kind of think about like which you have took away from each company as you've gone on to like build your new startup, like which you can share with the audience, both technical and not technical as well.
Yeah, so okay. So so that question, like it's like almost 25 years of journey across all of those places. So
Yes.
yeah, so like the first decade for me is I was in like um more like learn mode. So in all honesty, like I was just very junior engineer. I was at this point, what I optimized myself around was be a sponge. How can I learn as much as possible from other people? So the thing that I was optimizing for in the first decade of my career was around find the best people in the industry that you can work with. And so I kind of moved around different teams. I worked in .NET Framework, CLR. I worked for SQL Server. I worked for Visual Studio. I worked for BizTalk. So basically a mix and match of developer platforms, tooling, and server products. And as part of that, like one of the amazing thing at Microsoft is like it has this insane talent, which is very hard to find if you are working for any other organization. So I was very lucky during the early stages of my career where I got to work with those really smart people to kind of up level myself. So my first part of the career was just try out different things, see what is something that I am passionate about, and then just work with the smartest people. Then transitioning, and so around 2010, I start figuring out like distributed systems or cloud is something I was really passionate about. So so which brought me to take the next leap in my career, and then I ended up joining Amazon. So I joined the Simple Workflow team at AWS. So this is actually where I met my other co-founder, Max Sympathy, for the first time. He was a tech lead for Simple Workflow service, and I kind of worked with him as one of the founding members on the publicly available version of the service, which is still out there. And this is where felt I found my passion. And like Max himself was actually coming from a background of building messaging systems. He's the one who kind of built the whole core foundation, which for SQS, which powers like their simple queuing service even today. And he saw basically the transformation of Amazon from a monolith to a service-oriented architecture, and how these messaging technologies plays a core role in as part of those transformations. So although messaging as a primitive works, but it's too low level. So Max was came up with this idea of, oh, can we raise the level of abstraction higher, where engineers write code and we make it durable for them. I worked with him as one of the founding members to kind of make that a reality, essentially, as part of the simple workflow service. And so this is what we basically, and we saw how developers were kind of getting developer productivity wins when they are building applications on top of the platform. And back then, the funny thing is, like even the whole Temporal as a company, the idea was seeded in 2010 when me and Max was in the simple workflow team. So since then, I kind of got hooked into this journey that, oh, this is something that I'm passionate about, and I'm going to like, this is a problem. I saw that problem heads on. And then I kind of jumped in that, oh, this is something that I'm going to build my entire professional career solving this problem. So we ended up shipping Simple Workflow in 2012. I think it was very popular within Amazon. It's actually one of the fastest growing service inside AWS because of the adoption we were getting from internal teams. But I think publicly, I don't think we were able to nail the developer experience to a point where we could drive mass adoption externally out of Amazon. So, which kind of led me to like I had an opportunity come my way where I actually ended up coming back to Microsoft Azure side of things this time. Now, like this is a time period where like the transition from Steve Ballmer to Satya was happening essentially at Microsoft, and Microsoft was also starting to find their footing on the cloud side of things. I feel lucky to be playing like a little bit part in as part of the transformation also. So I basically joined a Azure Service Bus team, which is the messaging stack for Azure. And I was a tech lead for a product called Event Hubs there. And so this is where um, I saw the exact same story playing out what I saw at Amazon, where how messaging as a core underlying primitive and developers were using it to build reliability or resiliency into their applications. So this is where I kind of this is a stage of my career where I kind of took things like more like a learner or follower to now drive innovation. So this is the first time I started a completely organic homegrown effort to build an open source library by the name of Durable Task Framework, which is similar ideas like simple workflow, but bringing it into the Azure ecosystem and especially targeting .NET developers. I remember back then, I went to each and every exec at Microsoft to try to convince them that how a platform like this could be a game changer for a developer ecosystem. I couldn't make it happen. It's very hard to do like a bottoms up innovation at Microsoft. The thing that I take a lot of pride still on is so that durable, like organically, it got so much adoption that just Microsoft couldn't get rid of that open source framework to a point where Azure Functions team recently took a dependency on it to build what they are now calling as durable functions because this is something customers loved it and then they start using that framework pretty organically for all sorts of problems. So
So
that was,
Samar,
sorry, go
So
ahead.
before we go to the Uber experience, I just want to like kind of like pick on a few things you mentioned, which I think are very interesting, right? So like the first kind of aspect you mentioned is like the sponge piece. Like you were just like focused on learning, trying to work with really interesting people and like really tough problems. And I think that in your 20s, if you're doing that, like seems like, that can lay the foundation for success. And then you kind of sought kind of some technically innovative problems or challenges. And AWS, obviously, when it was starting, was kind of at the frontier of the cloud. So you kind of found yourself in that opportunity as well. And you were kind of looking at some technical challenges there. And then you started developing pattern matching, which once you came back to Azure, you were able to derive technical innovation, which I think are kind of three very critical pieces for a successful entrepreneur to have, right? Like, hey, you need to be able to have a strong foundation, be able to kind of like execute something technically hard, and then have the ability to pattern match if you want to build your own innovation thing. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that you kind of were building your foundation for Temporal like from the early days.
Yeah, absolutely. You are absolutely correct. But I think so. After that, essentially, I remembered around 2015, Uber opened up office here in Seattle. I saw so many similarities between Uber and Amazon, essentially. Like I still remember, like when once a recruiter reached out to me, I didn't even know what Uber was. So I said, okay, let me install the app, try it out. It felt magical. Oh, you press a button on a phone and suddenly a car shows up at you. So back then I actually got convinced. Okay, it's like this is like Uber is completely going to transform the world essentially. So I really wanted to be part of on the front lines of innovation or making that transformation, which led me to Uber in 2015. When I joined Uber, Uber was actually going through this interesting phase that they started with a monolith like every other startup. In order to scale the company, they started moving towards a microservices architecture. And that was somehow they ended up in a place where they had more microservices and engineers in the company. And so you can imagine building stateful applications there was a complete mess. It requires orchestrating calls across dozens of those microservices with variable availability characteristics. So, and the funny thing is, somehow both me and Max, the tech lead that I worked with at SWF, ended up joining the company within a month of each other. Complete coincidence. That's like we didn't even stayed in touch after left Amazon. Max actually ended up going to Google, and then somehow we ended up our paths again merged at Uber when we both of us joined the Seattle engineering team. So both of us then convinced the leadership there, oh, we know how to solve this problem. So this is where once again I leaned on to my experience with durable task framework at Azure, where I started a completely homegrown bottoms-up effort by open source effort by the name of Cadence to kind of target that problem. And that actually became really, really viral within Uber. We started the project, I think, in 2016. By 2019, we were running almost over 100 different applications, which were powered out of the platform within the company.
That
And
that's
then and then we start seeing all sorts of adoption for the open source platform externally outside of Uber. And then one thing led to another, and then both me and Max felt we have seen it enough time where we have a platform which is broadly applicable to a wide class of problems out there. So we took the leap and then started Temporal, essentially. So a lot of lessons along the way, but I think, Hassan, the way you summarized it is build your foundation, get excited about the problem you want to solve, and then drive innovation, essentially. What's the three key lessons for me?
No, I think like like it's crazy, right? Like you spent so much time in this problem, and then you have been able to successfully scale this into a company as well, and which clearly shows your depth as well. I think like one thing we were chatting about was you were a technical engineer. Obviously, as you mentioned now in the story, you tried to pitch commercially to like the Microsoft execs. So you had some exposure from a business perspective, but you were a true engineer, very technical architect. And today you are a CEO. And obviously, as a CEO from a idea stage to a $1 billion company raising tens of millions of dollars, you have to rebrand yourself. You have to rethink different strategies. What advice would you have for non-technical, like technical founders, like about how you have kind of gone about doing that? I think that'll be very helpful to people to hear.
Yeah, it's been a very intense journey for me, essentially. As you said, like, by the way, I've never been people's manager throughout my professional career. I've
Wow.
always been excited about technical challenges. I've actually built my entire professional career writing code, essentially. So, to the point where when both me and Max started the company, I was actually one of the top contributors to the core code base, essentially, for Temporal. Um, so for me, and this is at least for, so there are a lot of founders, and I have so much respect for them who basically they have an idea, they wake up next day, and then they build a company around it. Essentially, I cannot be that founder. I am someone who loves problem. And this is something that I built my entire professional career solving this one problem. So I think, first of all, knowing your strengths essentially is very important as part of this journey. One of the things, by the way, like from 2010 to 2019, you have no idea how much I tried to kind of make. There is a lot of failures for me. I have so many scars trying to convince people that this is a problem which is exist in the industry at a very, very massive level. And then if we can make that transformation for developers from the way they are building these applications to this new platform, it could be a game changer for the entire industry. I could not make it happen. I have so many stories that I can tell you.
Someone
Maybe
just a quick question there, right? Because a lot of people when they're like, especially like founders, I think if you're not super bought into your idea, you may kind of like you get two, three failures, you may give it up. You may, if you're super bought in, maybe you get five failures, you will give up. So you kind of kept on it 9 years. Like, what was the passion? What was the driver, which allowed you to be like the core conviction, which is you like, no, like everyone is wrong. I'm gonna keep at it. Like, what was that? Was it like internal? You were seeing some metrics, which you were kind of like in your open source community. Like, what was keeping you going on this problem?
it's intuition. It's at the end of the day, it's basically one interesting characteristic that I found in all amazing founders out there, and this is why they are respected a lot, is they are more like firefighters, right? So you see a fire essentially, and then everyone is running away from the fire except the firefighters who run towards it. Founders have very similar mentality. They see a problem, they run towards the problem, as opposed to large majority of the people, they try to work around that thing essentially. So for me, essentially, I saw like even in 2010, it was absolutely clear for me that there is this problem exists. At the end of the day, when you are building a company, the key thing what you are trying to do is like there is a problem which is uh, prevalent enough, and you can come up with a creative solution to that problem where you are like figuring out the value chain, what problem you are solving for a user is that's what problem this is what product market fit is. And then eventually you need to find out like how people are going to pay money for the solution that you are providing for that problem, and that is what is called as a product market fit. So I think the key lesson for me there is like, yeah, have a problem that you like tune everything out, figure out what value you are creating as part of the problem that you are trying to solve there.
So maybe somewhere like a question here would be that, you kind of obviously started building conviction around this problem around your time at AWS, and that kind of started keep going up and up. How did you know after Uber was the right time to take the leap to build Temporal?
So actually, like both me and Max are very passionate about the technology, this particular space, and we are firm believers that we have a gigantic opportunity if we can make that transformation happen. We actually had we never saw ourselves building a company essentially. We like because like we had like very amazing jobs at these larger tech organizations like Microsoft or Amazon, at Uber, and even at Uber, like they gave us a lot of freedom to kind of go and then build this open source project and then able to make that transformation. What both of us were like really focused on is how we can drive massive adoption for the open source cadence when we were at Uber. That we, because of the success of our open source project, we actually had inbound investors coming to us essentially and try to convince us that, oh, like you folks have a very amazing technology and it has a lot of potential. Like you can drive this innovation in the industry and then have a gigantic impact. So we, both me and Max told those investors, yeah, that's our plan, and then that's why we are building it as an open source project. So this is where there were at least this one person, Lenny from Amplify, essentially, who had many conversations with me and Max, tried to convince us that like you are thinking it the wrong way. Like for a such a core platform, the way you make it successful, you put your money where your mouth is. Essentially, you need to build an independent entity to drive massive adoption for it. Because at the end of the day, like if you stay at Uber, you won't be able to get that flywheel going of driving more adoption for your open source project. And I feel he was absolutely right. And this is where is like once we build this independent entity around with Temporal, and that actually helped us build this massive adoption for the open source project for us.
So let's talk about a bit more about the fundraising piece as well, because you've obviously had like amazing inbound interest. You've raised from like some of the best funds like Sequoia. Your deck is used for training at Sequoia's like pre-seed programs as well. So you obviously did not know about the VC market, but you've been very successful. Like, like as an example of a founder who's raised from everyone. What do you think like was the core reason for that?
Um, so in like core reason for why we had a successful funding round.
Yes, like how did like you were able to like kind of like get this all these funds to like rally around you?
I think few things. First of all, both me and Max essentially have been in the like. Uh, there's a lot of people who knew us that oh these are these two crazy developers who are trying for the last decade to make. So in that space, we had a lot of presence essentially. So and I think that actually helped us a lot because the first thing VCs are looking for is credibility of the founding team, and we had a lot of that credibility because we've been iterating over that problem for a long period of time in places like Amazon and Microsoft and then at Uber essentially. So that actually played a huge role. The second thing people typically are looking for is how big is that space? What's the TAM? And I think for a project, for a platform like Temporal, even today, that's the hardest thing to answer, by the way, because the TAM is just so massive. But this is where open source actually helped us a lot because of even when we were at Uber, started getting adoption for our open source in places like HashiCorp, LinkedIn, Airbnb, Coinbase, Checker, DoorDash, Box. Like all of these organizations or engineers in those organizations have very similar needs, and they started adopting their technology for all sorts of use cases within those organizations. And that actually helped us validate the TAM big time. That, oh, this technology is not pretty specific to the needs of Uber. This is a problem which actually exists in a lot of other places also. So that was the second key thing, like validating the TAM, like how large of a market you are going after is also pretty important. And basically the third thing essentially comes down to basically product market fit. So, and this is where I think Hassan, you kind of also referred in the beginning, as and we people used to describe us, oh, Temporal is an interesting company. They have a product market fit without a product, essentially. And once again, I think open source as being a vehicle there actually helped us big time. So I think those were the three big factors, in my opinion, which actually helped us raise a very, very healthy round. The first seed round and A round was just basically on the backs of essentially credibility and an insane product market fit because of the success of the open source that we were seeing early on. And in all
Uh,
honesty, I think the timing was also, and this is the luck factor. Every founder needs it essentially. Back then, I think the way the timing in the market was also played in our favor too.
no, I think like, you guys obviously are like have founder market fit and you have a great product and VCs are chasing you. Like it's an ideal situation, right? Like I think like founders who typically tend to build products which do what they're supposed to do have a good TAM, and you will always have investors who are willing to invest. If you're chasing VCs, that typically does not end up working well.
Yeah, I see someone in chat. Basically, what is a TAM? So TAM is basically stands for total addressable market. So, and as founders, basically, I think that's one of the key things where is eventually, can you build $1 billion business? Eventually, it depends on how like large market you are going after. And so typically the word used in the
So,
industry is
so
TAM.
someone is the follow-up there on that TAM is that what do you think was your true TAM? I know it's pretty massive, but like do you have a estimate you can share?
A lot of people ask me that. So, so here's the thing. Actually, probably Hassan, I haven't explained what temporal does. Is it okay if I maybe give
Yeah, yeah,
like a
for sure.
two
Yes.
minute explanation? Yeah. So, at
And
the end of the,
please do include like the AI agent application of temporal as well. I think that's so relevant in today's market.
absolutely. So let me try to first explain what problem we are trying to solve. Like in today's world, as people are building these applications for cloud native environment, like majority of the code that you are writing essentially is to handle failures. So let's imagine you have a function or like let's say money transfer, a very simple application, which is someone starts to transfer money from a source account to a target account. So the way you would write that application is, yeah, so let's say you basically take money out of a source account. So you debit and then you credit it to a target account. But imagine that during the execution of a function, you debit and the process dies. So suddenly now you have a transaction where you remove the money from the source account, but you never credited it into a target account. So you have an inconsistent state and you lost that money in thin air, essentially. So majority of the code people are writing to handle that, to make sure your transaction completes successfully. So what Temporal provides you with an ability is you write a function as a software developer, and during the execution of a function, if a failure happens, we remember all of the state, like local variables, call stack, and everything, and we will resurrect that on a different host and continue executing exactly where it left off without you as a software developer writing a single line of code for it. So what ends up happening is this eliminates almost more than 80% of the engineering people are doing. which is stitching together components like queues, databases, retry mechanisms, durable timers to build that resiliency into your apps. So, in a nutshell, this is the value proposition that we are trying to provide with the platform. So, but now this primitive is applicable to such a broad class of problems out there. And to your point, Hassan, like initially, by the way, at Uber, for instance, in a microservices architecture where you are building stateful applications, which requires orchestrating calls across dozens of those microservices with variable availability characteristics. So this is where a platform like Temporal just makes it super trivial for developers to code that up as your application logic. But the funny thing is, like, although me and Max originally thought about building this platform for this whole AI or especially the agentic AI world, but what we are finding out is Temporal as a platform is a perfect fit for orchestrating calls across these agents. Because what's happening is the world is kind of moving from these large foundational models. It's already kind of consolidating with very few players who have this large foundational models to now agents which are amazing at doing something very specific, which means now building applications across those agents is requires orchestrating calls across like many of those agents. So the thing is the durable execution layer that we've been trying to build with Temporal as a platform is so applicable to this agentic AI world also, where so that's where we started to see a lot of adoption for those agents. So now tying it back to your TAM question is, so far, the way we used to describe TAM is at the end of the day, how many developers are in the planet? I think they have 40 million plus developers. And how many today, by the way, Temporal has around 300 to 350,000 developers, weekly developers to work on top of the platform on a day-to-day basis. So we are very small. We are of share of the total addressable developer market. And then we basically, but at the end of the day, Temporal today is capped by how many developers are there who are building those applications. Because the more developers we bring on, the more applications that they build, and the more then consumption they drive on Temporal as a platform. So, and we are building a consumption-based business behind our cloud service. So at the end of the day, we are bottlenecked on how many developers are out there. The interesting thing with this whole AI transformation that's happening in the industry, this is the very first time where we are entering an era where probably applications, these agents are the one who are building applications. And guess what? Temporal is actually one of an amazing target for building those apps. So there's actually a lot of DSLs or low code, no code solutions who are now building on top of Temporal as a platform. So basically, they are going after certain DSLs, but they are targeting Temporal as a underlying foundation for building applications. So we are starting to see in this agentic AI world, these applications are coming much faster. They are no longer bottlenecked on a developer out there on the other end of the side because now it's bringing more people into the platform who previously are not traditionally software developers. So this is where now going back to your question, I have no idea what the
Your
TAM is.
TAM, your TAM is gonna explode somewhere. Like after you told me, like, for the native AI, like I'm gonna be using Temporal for like building our agentic application because this
Yeah.
problem in the agentic space is just so much even bigger that it's crazy like how much code you have to write. So I totally relate to this problem, and we're gonna be leveraging Temporal, and I'm pretty sure the orchestration platforms are going to explode, and you guys are primed to even be benefit from this space.
So basically,
Uh,
but the framework I wanted to give you is like, yes, if you ask me a number, Samar, give me a number. What's the TAM? I don't have that number, but here, this is the framework that we are using. That, and by the way, every founder at the end of the day, it's how they can increase the size of your TAM also.
So somewhere like we briefly talked earlier about open source, and you kind of like now touched on the number of developers you have as well. I think there's one question here, which is very relevant and pertinent here as well. How do you manage your open source activities and initiatives while running a commercial company? And I think a lot of companies founders may have this question. So if you can kind of give some approaches and general strategies, how to think about this.
Yeah, so Hassan, like I can give probably like a whole day seminar on this topic essentially. So the funny thing is, by the way, we are an open source. We have a pretty unique posture around open source. So actually, let me explain that first little bit. So we have around so imagine a platform like Temporal, like every Snap story is a Temporal workflow. So basically, every time you post a Snap story, there is a workflow that runs in the on background on top of our cloud, essentially. That's their core business, by the way. Like basically, we go down, Snap is down, essentially. It took them roughly 6 to 9 months to kind of build and test and then roll out that application in production. So the way Temporal works is we have SDKs in like 6, 7 languages, which developers are using for building these applications. And but those SDKs underneath the cover use our backend essentially, which either you can take both our SDKs or our Temporal server and then run it yourselves, or you can just have us provide a fully managed version of the Temporal backend through Temporal Cloud. That's how we make money essentially. But at the end of the day, it's 100% lock-in because when you are building those applications, you are using very opinionated SDK because we are a programming model that we are basically providing to all of those developers. Once you build that application, and then let's say tomorrow as a company, Temporal just disappears, you have a huge problem on your hand because now you have your core mission critical application written using our platform and you have nowhere to host it. So this is why we are not an open core company. Our entire core product experience lives out there in the wild. Um, because the whole idea is you can build any application using our SDKs, run the server yourself. We have a very differentiated cloud offering where we believe if which temporal cloud is the best place to run your application. But let's say if you are not happy with our service, we provide actually a migration feature with zero downtime. We will migrate with and zero lines of code change. We can move your application back to your self-hosted temporal server. So there is no lock-in. So this gives people a peace of mind. So this is why open source is a key part of our strategy because we are just part of such core mission critical applications for so many large organizations out there. So for me, so for us, so this whole open source stance made is a very core part of our business. But at the same time, the thing that I tell founders, you need to have a very clear strategy around monetization before making anything open source. Until you have that clear strategy, don't open source, essentially. And there are so many examples. I highly recommend there are examples like Docker, for instance. Amazing technology. Everyone uses Docker, but Docker as a company essentially still trying to find their footing because they didn't have a good monetization strategy in place. So, and open source is actually one of those decisions, which is one-way door decisions. You cannot take it back. And be very like as a startup founder, any decision which are two-way door decisions, yes, you quickly iterate. Don't overthink it. Make because you can take those things back. You cannot take back one-way door decisions essentially. So you need to be very strategic. You need to be very thoughtful on those one-way door decisions.
That is solid advice. So Samar, talking a bit more about company building and your journey, like kind of scaling Temporal, you're now around 250, 270 employees, I believe,
Around
approximately
250. Around 250.
250 employees. And you've never been a people manager, as you mentioned before, Temporal. So how was that journey? Like, hiring this team, kind of finding amazing stars like yourself and managing them. Like what was that transition for you? And can you share some tips and tricks for other founders who are scaling their businesses and their companies?
Um, so so people used to ask me, what is our journeys is pretty unique. Every startup journey is very unique, essentially. So what people used to ask me, Summer, what's been the most challenging part of basically you building the company? hands down, the first, like the thing that I used to tell people was recruiting. Like, especially starting a company with just two people and then growing it to 250, like recruiting is the one of the hardest challenges. Convincing people about your mission and vision, having a solid culture, thinking through what kind of company you want to build. There's so many things you need to think through to kind of attract talent or top tier talent to join you on on that journey. Um, but like in the, especially like if you ask me in the last 2 years, one of the things that is typically rough for founders and especially technical founders like myself who had no people's management experience before starting the company is you need to keep on reinventing yourself every 6 months, and you need to be very thoughtful. You cannot be reactive. You need to proactively think. For instance, like when I start the first year for me, that what the company needed was high, good quality coding contribution. So for me, the first year starting the company, I was one of the top contributors to our code base, essentially, because we were trying to basically get the first production version of Temporal platform out there. But then, like, if let's say 5 years in, if I'm still, that's all I'm doing, that just writing code, I'm doing something wrong because now the for me as a leader, the needs for the company is very different. So as a leader, you need to figure out, you need to be very, this is what like founders needs to have a sense of what are the needs of the company. Because you have assigned roles and responsibilities for every other employee that, oh, this is your role, this is what you are supposed to do, and this is what successful you looks like. But as a founder and especially as a CEO, you are the catch-all, and you need to be thoughtful around what are the real needs of the company, and you need to transition yourself in basically delivering those needs. So I think the biggest takeaway for me is be very proactive in figuring out what are the need of the company, and based on those needs you need to transition or transform yourself to deliver on those. So sometimes, for instance, I was a top recruiter because that was the need of the company. Sometimes I'm out there in the field and selling and figuring out a real go-to-market strategy. Sometimes I'm a DevRel and then out there and then trying to convince new developers to kind of and convert them as basically users on top of the platform. So you need to keep on transforming yourself essentially as the needs of the company evolves. And for me, in
You're
all honesty,
like
that's been the hardest part.
you wore like very different hats, but you've done it successfully. That's amazing, amazing to hear, amazing to hear, and like I'm sure like would be helpful for the founders to know as well. So there's one question which some folks were asking about, like how could someone be part of your journey and invest in Temporal? I don't know if there's something you can share about that. Uh,
So So I'm trying to understand when you say invest, like invest money in temporal, or like is it like invest or like as a user? First of all, we are an open source project essentially. So people who are interested in contributing to temporal, like we have tons and tons of open source contributions comes in. Right now, for instance, I'm not looking to invest or raise more money. So I think probably there's not a lot of opportunities to kind of invest money in temporal at the moment right now.
and would you be you obviously you guys are still early, so I think like the IPOs or exit strategies that may not be relevant. You guys are like massive growth, but is there any comment you want to share on that, or if that's a relevant question?
So for us, so by the way, the thing that I am kind of focused on building out a business
Yes.
essentially. And I think, by the way, this is one thing, one advice I have actually also will give to any founder out there. Don't think about exit too early on. Think about, we, by the way, as a company is known for being very inside out, essentially. At the end of the day, create value. And that's the thing you need to be obsessed about is how you are creating value for your own users or out there in the industry. As long as you have absolute clarity, on how you are creating value, all sorts of exit opportunities will come your way. The way right now we are focused on is we have a business to build and we are heads down building that business to the best of our knowledge. And whether it's an IPO in our future or some other exit, we will see when that happens.
And some of your career is like a master class in value creation, right? Like since Microsoft, you've done that at Amazon, at Uber, and then now at Temporal. So I think fundamentally to win in life and win, especially in the startup world, like value creation is the most fundamental thing to do and have a successful outcome or a career, whatever someone is trying to do. Uh, One question I think would be very pertinent from a timing perspective is also like, you have this massive AI hype. There are foundational models, there are AI applications, there are AI agents. You have an app, you obviously now are starting to get into this space as well as a fundamental foundational core pillar as these AI agents take off. How do you kind of think of this space? Where do you see the opportunities? Maybe there's some founders who are listening, who are like thinking of new ideas, like prediction you have for this sector or space you think the opportunities lie in today?
So it's I think we living in very interesting time because these kind of transformations of the entire industry happens um, maybe only once in a decade or even like a century. So, for example, even in my career, I saw a few transformations like internet, for instance, which completely transformed how people ran their businesses. Then, of course, in early 2000, like the whole cloud thing, kind of completely changed the game for like how people are building applications. I think AI is literally like once in a lifetime kind of a transformation, which all of us are witnessing. And one of the things which I have seen is software is eating the world. Like at least since I grew up, and I've continuously seen that software is slowly eating the world. Um, in the last like 30, 40 years, essentially. Um, what AI is doing is it's making supercharging it. And we are going to see in the next 25 years, the entire world we live in will be completely different. How people operate, or how we run their businesses, or basically even live their lives will be completely different than how we are doing today. So there's so much opportunities out there. It's like at the end of the day, uh, it's about coming up with creative ideas and then turning those ideas. AI is a tool which is allowing you to turn those ideas into real value creation for a user, essentially. And so, in all honesty, it's like we live in interesting times. There's so much opportunity out there, and at the end of the day, you are gated by your imagination at the moment right now.
I think that's a great point. So somewhere like last two questions around like some of the personal side. Always love asking people like, when I do a podcast or anything, like what advice would you give to your younger self, knowing what you know now for the last 20 years? Like any things which kind of pop up in your mind?
Um, what advice I give to my younger self? Don't waste time on gaming. So, yeah. But I, I felt probably taking more risk early on, essentially, is I have probably pretty conservative in the earlier part of my career. And I think having more belief in what you are doing and then acting on it faster, probably one of the core advice, like key advices that I will give my younger self.
And then because we're obviously doing this webinar with Pak Launch, and there are a lot of mostly Pakistani founders and folks listening to this as well. What kind of advice would you give for like builders building in Pakistan today as like the AI wave happens? They're thinking of building companies or they're building existing companies. Like how can they think of things? How can they kind of benefit from some of your experiences? Move to the like take advantage of the US markets. Anything to share there?
I think first of all, the world is getting smaller. One of the things that I see is first, I have so much respect for people in Pakistan. It's challenging times, and then like I think this like one of the things, even the fundamentally the resiliency of Pakistan as a nation, essentially, even like the people of Pakistan, in my all honesty, I have very little respect for leadership there. So, but the people of Pakistan, the resiliency they have shown, I think that's by the way, every founding story I've seen is built on resiliency. It's built on constant like things going against you. Um, and I think the key trait essentially is be the have the positive mindset. And yes, you have been dealt a bad hand, but then the having a mindset of how you can make the most out of it is how you should be thinking. And think about value creation. The world is, by the way, getting smaller and smaller. It's like any interesting idea that you can come up with, which is as like having clarity of what value you are creating. Once you have that clarity, it doesn't matter you are in Pakistan or you are in US. Essentially, at that point, like people will jump on it. Like if you are creating something really valuable. So, and especially people from Pakistan coming from those backgrounds with that resiliency, which is such a core foundational trait of any founder out there, and build on it and have that clarity on value creation, and then do. I'm sure the people of Pakistan and the resiliency they have shown that great things will come out of it.
Well, I think that's great, Samar. Do you have like few more moments? There's some good questions from the audience, so I just want to make sure like they just came in. So
Yeah,
how
let's
do
do it.
you balance work and personal life, and what strategies for you have for managing stress and burnout, which obviously as a startup founder, I'm sure you have faced or multiple times or few times at least.
Uh, uh, le- Burnout and strategies around burnout. So, first of all, it's actually, I recommend people, they need to figure out what's their threshold, what's their red line. The way you only figure out your red line is once you breach it once or twice. So, pushing yourself to the limits is how you figure out your limit. Every person has their different limit, essentially. Um, and So figure out your limit. The way you will figure out your limit is when you push your boundaries. And once you figure, oh, this is your boundary, yeah, come up with a way, come up with a discipline to stay a little bit behind it, below it. For instance, like example would be, uh, highly recommend you need sleep. So as humans, you cannot function if you don't get enough sleep. So, but less if you have a bound, like if uh, I have a discipline around getting 8 hours of sleep, and this is where make sure because I just cannot function. So you need to then turn that managing your calendar. For me, the key thing is what are your strategic priorities? Turning that into your calendar and then managing your calendar. Getting good at that is the key learning. Especially for me, when I took on the CEO role, is the first 6 months was pretty rough for me, and but it eventually turned into like managing your calendar effectively.
And somewhere like one question one of the viewers is asking is around some of the biggest mistakes. So maybe, obviously as a startup founder, there are a lot of decisions being made, and sometimes those decisions are not the best decisions in hindsight. Any one or two you want to share which you kind of learned from and you're able to share those where the viewers can learn and avoid those mistakes from your lessons learned?
Um, I think the biggest lesson is if you're not making mistakes as a startup founder, that is a mistake. So, because it means you are being too conservative. So, it's startup is being, you need to be decisive. You will find yourself in a lot of places where you have to make decisions based on 40%, 50%, or 60 or 70% of the overall information. You never have, if you are taking too long, no, I want to have 100% clarity on the decision I'm making is going to be succeed, you are already doing something wrong, in my opinion. So even probably the biggest mistake for me is like sometimes, as I told you earlier, like I was a little bit conservative early on, is but you need to iterate. Iteration is more important and learning, but at the same time, don't make mistakes multiple times. Once you learn from it, essentially adjust,
Yeah.
use those learnings and apply it to next time around.
Do
But
you have
go
any
and make mistakes. Essentially,
yeah,
that's how you build companies.
no better way to learn than sometimes to make some mistakes as well. Any favorite questions for you as you when you interview technical or non-technical candidates who you always love asking?
So I typically ask is like I focus on a culture a lot. I in my opinion, of course, technical and all of those things, like when someone evaluating someone, if they can do the job, essentially, that's important. But at the same time, I think I'm evaluating people. Will they be a good cultural fit? And you learn a lot about a person around what's their hardest challenge that they have solved. It could be a personal life challenge or it could be a technical challenge, doesn't matter. What's the hardest challenge that they have faced as part of their past life? And then how did they tackle it is something that I love asking as part of interviews. And you learn a lot.
Resilience is key.
Yeah.
And somewhere like it seems like there are some founders who are thinking of raising capital in today's market. Any advice beyond the one you have already given, you will share like, hey, which is pertinent for the current market with the AI cycle, which they can leverage?
Dude, like if yes, if you are as part of AI, like raising is easy these days, essentially. So there's just so much money being deployed on AI side of things. Um, I I think the key thing is, as I said earlier, is be thoughtful about value that you are creating. As I told, like I think the key principle is what differentiated uh, your founding story, why you are the what problem you are solving, why you are the best person to solving that problem, and once you solve it, how big the market is. In my opinion, those are the three key questions. Essentially, have absolute clarity. As long as you have good clarity of answering those questions, I'm pretty sure you'll be successful.
And Summer, last question to like wrap this up. I think it's a good one is that imagine we are developers here. Can you give us a sample pitch to contribute to Temporal's open source community and why we should be excited about it?
Yeah, so first of all, this is a project. Temporal is an open source project, it's an amazing opportunity for developers in Pakistan to up level themselves. I think this is like on the you are on the edge. You are pushing the boundaries of innovation. Temple is pushing the boundaries on innovation on so many larger organizations. This is a project which is used by tens of thousands of organizations out there in the industry. One of the things that when I was growing up, essentially in Pakistan, and I just couldn't find opportunity, like how can I be part of like really opportunity which is pushing the boundaries of innovation. And in Pakistan, that's one of the core challenges. Open source is an amazing way, and it's not only temporal. Like projects like, for example, Postgres, or like even like Kafka, or like there's so many amazing open source projects out there, which actually presents an interesting opportunity for the raw talent that exists in Pakistan to kind of up level themselves as engineers. Because once you became part of those communities, and these are the technology which is pushing the boundaries of innovation. So now you are no longer restricted by geographies or you are in Pakistan, so you can, like previously, for example, that my first decade at Microsoft, that experience that I got where I was trying to find opportunities to work with the smartest people. Every successful open source project out there is presenting that opportunity to every person on the planet, irrespective of where they live in. So, in my opinion, open source is an in colleges, in universities, like I think like they should be proactively coaching students to look for those your passionate open source projects and figure out how they can contribute to those to up level themselves and become part of those communities.
I think this is a great way to close this interview. And Summer, thank you so much for taking the time on your Sunday to join us here. And on behalf of Park Launch as well, thank you so much. I think it's a great conversation, kind of sharing about like the technical nature of building what you're building, sharing about your career, fundraising, how to build a company, some of the lessons learned from being an individual contributor to becoming a CEO and the CTO and managing a lot of teams, and how can even young engineers upskill themselves in Pakistan and globally as well. And you're doing like an amazing company, and I think we all are rooting for you, and it's very exciting. I will be using Temporal moving forward at my company as well, so I'm excited. Like, I think such a cool product you're building, and we're very excited to have you join us. I think, is there anyone, if someone wants to reach out to you, are you available via LinkedIn, Twitter, email? Like, I just don't want to put you on the spot, but if this is obviously being recorded. So, what's the best way for folks to kind of get in touch if you're okay sharing that?
So yeah, I typically prefer just send me an email. My email is Samar, SAMAR at temporal.io. So just if you have something that you need any help with or want to discuss something, reach out to me on email. I get so much request on LinkedIn, so I try to add people there, but it's pretty hard for me to keep up with all of the requests that coming in there. So, but reach out to me over email if you have a question that I can be helpful with. I'll try to make time and provide help. But sorry,
Amazing.
Hassan. By the way, first of all, thanks for having me. Really love that all of the questions that you asked. I didn't realize today is actually 23rd March, so happy Pakistan Day for
Yes, it is.
all the listeners.
Thank you. Thank you, Summer. Ali, do you want to say anything before we wrap up, or should we close it out?
Yeah, we can close it out. Thank you so much. Thank both.
Thank you so much, Summer. Really appreciate
Okay,
it. Take care. Have a good rest of your
take,
day. Thank you,
take
everyone,
care.
for listening and joining us. Really appreciate all the questions as well. Hopefully, it was helpful. Take care.
Okay, Khuda Hafiz.
Hafiz.